The last time anyone saw Susan Streeter or Stacy McCall was over the weekend at this house in Battlefield. The girls had gathered here with some friends after graduating from Kickapoo High School on Saturday. They left here early Sunday morning.
In this episode of Suspect Zero, the case of the Springfield Three.
As we know, senior year of high school is an important time and a rite of passage for many students. Students feel a certain freedom into adulthood, and they believe that the decisions they make are now in an adult status and the next journey of their lives are now beginning. Unfortunately, this is where Susie Streeter and Stacy McCall didn't get to take that next journey, along with Susie's mother, Sheryl Levitt. Susie and Stacy were supposed to be staying at their friend Janelle Kirby's house. This is the night of their graduation. As they were at Janelle's house, the house was too crowded with family over for the graduation party. So they decided that they would leave Janelle's house to go back to Susie's house to sleep, where they would have more room on Susie's brand new waterbed that she got for her graduation gift. Welcome to episode 3 of Suspect Zero, where we not only discuss unsolved cases, but serial killers whose crimes are lesser known or virtually unknown, yet the most terrifying. I'm Dawn Washburn, and joining me is my co-host, Dr. Michael Arntfield. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Don. Good to see you again. This is, this week, our third case is one, I mentioned this before, that we've been working on for a bit. And I don't know, maybe I'll give a brief background of sort of how we stumbled across this. Yeah. So my Cold Case Society, which is an unsolved crimes think tank at the university where I teach, and which has been the subject of a TED Talk. And so I'll be sharing the link, or the link is available on this podcast for that. I basically select students each year and some other professors to use fresh eyes to analyze, very strange unsolved crimes that don't have conventional leads, or where those leads have been exhausted. So kind of like this podcast where there is zero clue who did it and there's no DNA. And what would, someone with no prior knowledge of this case, no experience, what would they do in terms of brainstorming new investigative avenues? So I provide that opportunity to my students. I say, here you go. This is what's been done. This is what we're likely dealing with in terms of an offender. What would you do next? And we have a new case each year, and there's different ways that we select our cases. But this year, after the pandemic, considering we were working remotely, we decided to use and examine a missing persons case. Missing persons, plural, deemed dead now, very suspicious, known only as the Springfield Three. And again, this is a case that I don't think a lot of viewers and listeners are going to have heard of, but is chilling and isn't that old for there to be no leads and no bodies ever found. So why don't you give our fans a quick synopsis there, Don?
So when you brought me in on this case, I had presented this case to my students, and you're clearly a college professor. I am a high school teacher of seniors. So when I presented this case to my students, it really kind of hit home because I teach seniors who come in September ready for prom and graduation, and that's all they're thinking about. So when you're thinking about what happened to the Springfield Three, my students really put themselves in the position of these girls. And from that point, it was just, they were really knee deep in this case. So the Springfield Three background, as we know, senior year high school is an important time and a rite of passage for many students. So the students feel a certain freedom into adulthood. They believe that their decisions they make are now adult and their journey is about to begin. Unfortunately, this journey didn't happen for Susie Streeter and Stacy McCall. They would never have the chance to really begin that journey. On June 7th, 1992, they set out. Susie and Stacy were supposed to be showing up at a water park with their friend, but they never really contacted that friend in the morning after they were partying that night. They were supposed to stay at their friend Kirby's house, and at that point, they decided that they were not going to sleep there because too many people were staying over as a result of the graduation party that was taking place. So they left Branson, Missouri, and drove all the way back to Springfield, where Susie lived, because she had a waterbed, and she said, let's go just stay in my waterbed tonight, and it'll be a better place to be. So around 2 o'clock in the morning, they left Kirby's house to go back to Susie's house. And from that point, no one really knows what happened to Susie, Stacy, and also Susie's mother, Sheryl Levitt, who was in the house as well. So that's kind of the background of it. Their personal belongings were all left behind. No one really knows what happened to these three women at all.
So what we've got is, you've very eloquently described, is two young women at the precipice of starting basically the next chapter in their life. It's high school prom. It's an exciting time. They decide to go back to the one girl's house, Susie's house, because the other place was too crowded. So they're in her home. They're not having, a party there. It's just the two of them and Susie's mother, who lives there. And all three women vanish without a trace from their own home and have never been found since the last seen in, like you said, 92. And here we are, 2021. And no suspects ever announced, other than, we will get to that, someone who tried to take credit for it. And that confession has never been corroborated. It's also never been, I guess, refuted. But interesting, the confession did not include the whereabouts of where their bodies are, which is, in terms of assessing the veracity or the truthfulness of a confession, would be one of the things that you would have the confessor give up, because obviously that would confirm they had a hand in or direct knowledge of the crime. This person, this confessor, has never given that information. So we have, there's an urban legend that they're entombed in the concrete under a local parkade that was under construction at the time, a large parking garage. Someone went out a few years ago with an early model ground penetrating radar unit to see if there could be remains underneath a certain section of that garage, and the results were kind of inconclusive. It suggested something was there, but GPR, ground penetrating radar technology, has come a long way since then. But that was something that we looked at, because urban legends in cases like this, the vanishing of three people, low risk people. This wasn't a drug house. This wasn't there was no criminal activity going on here that would bring people to the house who might act opportunistically, or there's no large sums of cash or other goods in the house. This is naturally going to spawn a number of local theories, and one is that, they were, the reason the bodies have never been found is, given the location, either they were driven out of county and maybe out of state, or they're under this garage. But again, that was the theory with Jimmy Hoffa for years, and is a convenient theory. But that was one avenue that our students, I'll call them our students, you are now a member of the Cold Case Society, and that's something that we naturally had to look at. And what I'd like to do now is we're going to bring in the students who were part of this year's group, and who undertook these tasks on the side when dealing with their university studies amid a pandemic. And we're going to hear from them about the success of some of these investigative measures, their own theories, and where we can maybe go next in terms of our investigation, and where listeners and viewers can maybe help out. So let's now, we're going to come back after, and we're going to talk more about the theories, but let's give the students an opportunity now to come on and share their thoughts.
Hi guys, thank you for joining us today, and we're welcoming your perspectives on the Springfield Three case.
It's good to see everybody. I'm glad for our viewers and listeners, this is not everybody, but who's part of this year's team, but this was who was able to join us on short notice, and some students who've done some remarkable work in this, puzzling cold case. So let's sort of just open a discussion here for our fans, and let's talk about some of these what we call investigative action items that I assigned. Either, corroborate or refute some of the theories, or to at least open up sort of some new lanes in terms of where authorities should be exploring based on current 21st century adequacy standards. So Patrick, you had some interesting tasks specifically regarding theories about where the bodies might be.
Yeah, for sure. I worked really closely with Abby and Sydney on this, and it sort of started out, they're doing a lot of construction beside where I live, and they were pouring a lot of concrete, and then that really got my gears turning about the theory that the burial site for these victims could be the Cox Hospital parking garage. And so Abby and Sydney and I, we sort of teamed up and tried to kind of dig into how we could find an answer one way or the other in terms of, should we investigate this further, or is it totally a write-off? And what we found was it's actually a really challenging thing to get any definitive information without going in and digging it up, which I don't think we expected. I thought we were going to send a few emails and get some clear answers and be ready to go. And maybe I'll throw it to Sydney, because she got some pretty cool information from some architectural experts. But the idea was, we wanted to find the validity based on the case scenario that, these bodies would potentially have to be buried a year before the building was put up, how deep they'd have to be buried so that they couldn't be dug up during construction. Like, is that plausible? And is that even possible? Because if it's totally not possible, then we can move on and find different theories to run down. So we wanted just to kind of suss out the validity of that theory in general. And maybe I'll just toss it to Sydney then, if that's okay, because she got some cool information on that.
So my task was to find some architectural drawings or like Google images of the specific parking garage in question. And we did end up finding like the location of this parking garage, and kind of based on prior research, I was able to get in contact with Rick Norland, who was the original engineer who did the original GPR test. So basically, he was just, it's kind of been hard to get in contact with some people on this particular theory, because there's a lot of conflicting opinions of whether it's even possible for there to be bodies buried underneath this parking garage. So let me just see. So aside from Rick Norland, he was kind of questioning the whole theory because of the timeline and how the construction process started kind of like a year after the women went missing. So he was kind of saying that it's probably unlikely, but with the GPR scan that was done and the 3 anomalies that were found, I think that's really significant, because with the 3 anomalies found, I think that it's kind of not really a coincidence. So I did some further digging, and I was able to get in contact with like architectural technologists and engineering technologists to kind of get their opinion on whether it's even possible for there to be bodies buried in the specific location. So again, I kind of got some conflicting opinions on that. Basically, the architectural technologist was saying that there is a possibility that they could be buried under this parking garage, and the construction process may have actually missed this particular location. But then I've also had contrasting opinion where they were saying that throughout the construction process, there's no chance that like they would have not seen these bodies if they were there. So we're still kind of doing some digging on that. And I was also contacting a geologist in the States, and he was saying that there's definitely potential that there could be bodies there, and in other criminal cases, bodies have been buried under concrete. So I'm wondering, like, if the bodies were there, would they be underneath the concrete entirely, or maybe like within the concrete? So I'm trying to get some more information as to if these anomalies were within the concrete itself or beneath the concrete. So.
And Sydney, you said something interesting about the ground floor being poured. If it was pillared or if there was actually a basement floor, that was, and we can't verify that yet. We were digging into that. I know Abby, you were looking to some records to prove if there was, depending on how the foundation was poured, would either totally write it off as a possibility or it could be a chance. Do you want to expand on that just quickly? Because I thought that was so interesting.
So from the architectural technologists, they were saying that if there was no basement floor of this parking garage and only the ground floor being like the base floor, then there is a potential that the construction process may have missed this specific location because so basically in the construction process, if there was no basement, only the perimeter of the building would have been like excavated pretty deep. And basically he was saying that if these bodies were located near like closer to the middle or around like the central area of the parking garage, then they could have been missed because only the trenches were essentially dug around like the perimeter of the building. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Let me just see. And then I've also got conflicting kind of opinions where someone was saying that if bodies were located under the specific parking garage and essentially like decomposing, it would create like air pockets in the ground and the concrete wouldn't like be able to support like a car's weight or something like that. So I've kind of had conflicting opinions about that, but still digging.
That's an interesting perspective because a lot of bodies entombed in concrete, they're, a surface lot or some other structure that is not as specific in its engineering as something like a parkade where, they have to account for weight and stress and expansion and contraction. And 3 adult bodies entombed in a small space would foreseeably affect that. So that to me stands out because it's one thing to bury someone under, say, a building and a foundation, but when you have something, whether it's a parkade or a library or a bank or where the structure needs to take into consideration additional weight than the weight leaves. I mean, libraries just have ever accumulating weight. That's interesting that there would be some kind of structural integrity problem if the bodies were there. So that to me stands out. That's amazing.
Yeah. In addition, I reached out to this, it's from a geomodel company. So basically I just asked, like, is it even possible for there to be bodies buried in a specific location? His response was pretty to the point, but he was just saying that yes, bodies have been buried under concrete in specific murder cases. Yes, it's possible to detect bodies under the concrete. It's also possible that these GPR anomalies are not bodies, but something else. And he was saying GPR technology is very common in criminal cases similar to this. So,
right. We've used actually GPR as part of the Cold Case Society not on concrete, but in a farmer's field a few years ago. And that find of ours remains under investigation. So, that's an avenue that we can continue to explore. Who else wants to chime in?
Just on the parking garage theory, note, I was in contact with the Springfield City Planning Department trying to get some of those drawings or any history on the construction of the building, because the thought was that if we have some of those drawings, it can give us a point blank answer of if there's a basement floor and essentially how far they had to dig, because if they were digging 10 feet down, well, we know that this is just over and done with as a theory. But the planning department was only able to direct me to who built it. And they gave me their information. I reached out to them, haven't heard back in about a month, which is fair because they are a much larger company than they were back then. And they were able to give me just some of the kind of invoices and stuff to know the exact timeline of the building schedule. But after that, not a whole lot else. But I will say I was impressed on how they did, indulge my request and not, ask why and think I'm just some punk trying to figure out this case on my own. Yeah. But I think for as wild a theory it is, with the amount of time that it's taken up of people's interest, it is still definitely worth reviewing. In an ideal world, I think we could go to where Rick Norland found those 3 anomalies, dig a hole, get some cadaver dogs, and get an answer that way. But getting the amount of reasonable evidence that that would be worthwhile has just been difficult.
Yeah, I mean, saying you want to go jackhammer up the concrete in a hospital parking lot during a pandemic isn't going to go over very well if you don't have a mountain of supporting evidence. And what we've got here is a little bit of this and a little bit of that and the urban legend. But yeah, I mean, we have to, this is a loose end that still needs to be tied up, unfortunately. It's sort of one of those things that's neither verifiable nor falsifiable. So what do you do with it? I mean, I feel like there's just one more piece of evidence needed in this case, whether it's a genuine confession or whether it's the recovery of some of clothing, something that will point us in the right direction. What I'm frustrated about is a seemingly tepid, lukewarm interest on behalf of police. Like, where's the anniversary stories? Where's the, not that, I mean, there's no evidence that reward money actually translates into actionable leads. But I mean, where is we're keeping this case sort of alive. What's everybody else doing?
Yeah. People don't really want to speak a lot on this case. It's strange because as I told you when we were working on the case initially, I had reached out to the journalist who brought in the concrete, theory, and her response to me, because I had asked her to come into my class and maybe speak to my students on how she really came about because I wanted them to learn some investigative things. So her response to me was, I don't mind coming in, but I cannot discuss my suspects, with an S, and I made note of that. And she also said that, I still live in this particular place and I cannot risk being, confronted by anybody with the information that I do have. So I feel like she actually kind of halted where she was in her tracks as well because of that. And that's why, a lot of it hasn't really gone forward. So there is a fear there. And I've said this before, I kind of feel like there's a seedy underbelly to this. I'm not sure where it's coming from, but a couple of coincidences that have taken place in the case as well, with the phone calls and when they were searching the house, and things that haven't even been revealed. And then also the entire crime scene was just destroyed. How do you even allow that to happen?
Why don't we talk quickly about the phone calls for our listeners?
So when Janice McCall, well, actually it really started with Janelle Kirby when she went to go search the house. And as she's searching the house, some obscene phone calls came through that she had answered, very sexual in nature. And she hung up and kind of dismissed them. And then there was another phone call or a recorded call on the answering machine that Stacy's mother had listened to, and that inadvertently got erased. And I'm just curious, like, do the police have phone records? I mean, you're able to get phone records and, to see who maybe the incoming calls or the outgoing calls at some point, and they were never even discussed.
Yeah, and I mean, we know that obscene telephone calls, sometimes end there. I mean, this is sort of a bygone. Now it takes on a digital form, which is why I've been saying cyberbullying is often paraphilic and sexual in nature, because it's a digital version of what we call telephone scatologia, which is within the sadistic spectrum and the enjoyment of listening, because we know sadists are very acoustically based, listening to the fear and trepidation and terror in whoever you're making these obscene or threatening statements to. So, I mean, obscene telephone callers don't typically just do that. And if they're targeting a particular residence, they may be voyeurizing or monitoring the residence. There may be a particular target there that they're especially excited about terrifying. And ultimately, in many cases, the calls become unable to satisfy the offender, and they need to escalate to the next step. So that in itself is huge, because there's been lots of theories floated that this was part of organized crime, or that there was maybe they owed money. But you factor in the phone calls with the fact you have 3 female victims, including 2 teenagers. I mean, this speaks to me of an obvious sexual motive. There's no ransom demand ever made, nor really an ability to pay one, from what I understand. And you mentioned that this person talks about suspects plural. Well, I can tell you, because the thought is, well, how do you control 3 people? Well, you can control 3 civilians, including 2 teenagers, very effectively by brandishing a gun. And that goes without saying. So a single offender with a gun could very easily, and we see this in a number of cold cases where there's no bindings used, there's no defensive wounds. It seems the victim went willingly to a location, and the thought is, well, why would they go? Well, again, a firearm can have tremendously persuasive powers, and this goes back to my talks about victimology, whereby going to a secondary crime scene or how the crime ends ultimately boils down to split-second decisions made by victims, which can hinge on a number of things, whether it be age, life experience, confidence, or what have you. So I'm leaning, especially when unpacking all this, regardless of where the bodies ended up, to a sexual motivation. Anyone else want to chime in on that? Cara, we haven't heard from you yet.
Yeah, so my task was to gather like media coverage and everything I could find online about the case and compile it into a document just so we could kind of go back and see everything that's out there about it. And in doing that, I also went through and found names of reporters or any kind of names I thought would be relevant to contact, and just put that into a list. And I know Nisha was kind of going through that and contacting people that she thought was relevant. And one thing that I did end up doing through the media coverage, there was a book published in September 2020. It's called Gone in the Night, The Story of the Springfield Three. And it's a fictional book, but it's mixed with nonfiction. So I wasn't sure if it would be really worthwhile to reach out to the author, but I did end up speaking to one of the authors, Brian Brown. And I just kind of asked about his experience with writing the book and if anything kind of came out of it, even though it was fictional, just if there was anything like I believe he lived in Springfield or near Springfield at the time. So he kind of like they used the real information, but then turned it into a fictional investigation. And he had some kind of interesting things to say. I guess after the book was published, people were going forward and saying different theories that they thought may have happened based on whether they knew the people or lived there or just things that they had heard. And he sent 3 of the most common theories, one of which was that the women were buried under the 3 horses sign at PFI Western Wear, which is a huge clothing store apparently. The other that the women were buried in the parking garage at Cox South, which we've really obviously discussed. And then another one that the girls were buried under a house in West Springfield. So I guess, yeah, there were kind of a bunch of different theories about what happened. And most people seem to think that drugs were involved and that Sheryl may have known some people who were a little like, I don't know, some individuals who may have been involved with that. But he kind of said based on everything that he didn't really think that drugs were involved just because he thought it would maybe have been solved by then. And also going off kind of the sexual motive, like I believe Sheryl had $800, the media said, in her purse, and that was left behind. So it does seem like if it was for money or even a little bit for money, like or robbery or whatever, they would have taken that. And I think the fact that that was left seemed a little bit suspicious. But yeah, and then also kind of how you guys were talking before about the difficulties in speaking with people throughout this case. Brian had kind
very
of
difficult.
Yeah, and Brian, who was just the author of the book, so it wasn't like he was like a detective or anyone who kind of, I think, had anything to lose with speaking to me. He was very hesitant to even speak with me because he said there's been some people that have tried to get information from him but won't disclose anything really about themselves and who they are, and so it's like strange kind of motives in getting the information from him. And then he kind of mentioned a few names that he thought would be worth speaking to, but basically said good luck with trying to speak to them. And he expressed the same difficulty with how it's been a very interesting case to kind of break through and talk to people about. He also mentioned one thing for his theory, just because I was kind of in the media, so I was kind of seeing the other theories that were discussed. But his was, he believed that there was one abductor or maybe 2. But he thought that maybe if there were several people involved, that someone probably would have broken by now and spoken out about it, just because he said it did garner a lot of media coverage at the time. And he also was thinking that he believes maybe somebody followed the girls home from Janelle's and then tried to get them out of the house, and thought it could maybe even be someone dressed as a cop or something, just because I don't really know. He didn't really elaborate on that, but I thought that was kind of interesting given how secretive things have been about the case. But yeah, I feel like I don't know, there's just a lot to it that it's hard to kind of pinpoint what an exact theory would be about it, but it was kind of interesting to hear what other people were coming forward and saying. And yeah, I don't know who, it's such a crazy, like, because based on the media coverage, there's been quite a few suspects in this case, and most of them haven't been ruled out because nothing's come out since everything that we already know. So to me, I see so many different possible motives based on the different potential suspects that they might have. And then another thing also about the media that I noticed I was thinking about while you guys were just speaking, is that there is quite a bit of coverage that's come out since, but it's always just saying the exact same thing. There's nothing really new coming out, or like not even, trying to get new information out. It's just basically a repeat article summarizing what is already known. It's not trying to do more to get people to come forward. It's just saying this case happened 25 years ago. This is what happened, and leaving it at that. It's not like, oh, okay, like if you've heard of this or anything, like they don't seem like they're trying to get more out of it. They just are kind of repeating what they've already said, and I'm not seeing much more coming through from it. But
that book you mentioned, that's interesting. So there is a term for a book like that. It's called a roman à clé, or a book with a key. And a lot of well-known books have been written like this, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. This is a way that you can take a true story and, largely for liability reasons, fictionalize it. Doesn't diminish or dilute the truthfulness of it or the importance of it, but you just, the names and places have been changed to protect the innocent, sort of as they used to say in Dragnet. And I mean, that's really interesting, the timing of that book being released at the same time, that we're trying to, breathe new life into this case that, as you said, Cara, has really just sort of been dust off last year's press release and put it back out there again with absolutely no new ideas, no new engagement strategies for the public to solicit tips. Because, and this again goes to, I think Brian is right. If you have a folie à deux with 2 or more offenders with a shared psychosis or set of paraphilias, after this length of time, if one didn't break, one is for sure going to get pinched for some other crime, and we'll use this as major leverage. And this speaks to a rogue single offender, in my view, with a sexual motive.
Michael, going back to the suspects, also, there are a lot of suspects in this case. I mean,
that's the problem. Is this is not a case where you have too few suspects and nothing to go on. You have all the usual suspects, to the point that it's just white noise. You've got people confessing to it with no evidence to support their confession. You've got people pointing the finger. I mean, this is a small town, not that small, but Main Street America at the foot of the Ozarks, and multiple generations of the same people there for years, and it becomes impossible at some point to disaggregate the rumor mill and urban legend from actionable leads. And it just seems that eventually the police just stop trying. And because what do you do with this information? Again, short of jackhammering the concrete or rousting every single male in town and seeing what you get. And we've seen that there's all kinds of stories that are coming out. My guess is this offender has other victims, obviously. I mean, this is not a neophyte offender. This is a mid-career or experienced sophomore who, I mean, to be able to go in, enter a private residence and abduct 3 people at gunpoint or using any means of coercion. You don't just wake up one day and decide, I'm going to dip my toe into this. You have experience with probably bindings, you have experience with weapons, and you will have certainly, whether it's obscene telephone calling or other preparatory sexual crimes, you will have other victims and subsequent victims.
And that's one thing in the media too. The neighbor saw, I guess, them going out or at 6 o'clock in the morning, I guess she saw a van, which I know we've kind of talked about while we worked on this case. And she like swore that she saw, I believe it was Susie driving the van, and heard a man's voice say, don't do anything, like just reverse and don't do anything stupid or something along those lines. And yeah, I feel like, especially kind of thinking of if it were one offender with a gun, then just held it to them and said, you drive and let's go. Like, it does seem like something you would need to kind of be completely prepared for and have the experience of doing, to get 3 women to leave without even a little bit of a noise indicating something was wrong.
And by having one of them who poses perhaps the biggest threat neutralized by having them drive the vehicle so that they're not out of sight or behind you plotting with the others, that removes them from the equation and allows the offender complete control, which again speaks to the fact this is someone who has done this or some version of this before. And that's why, I mean, really, I think the next step is looking at similar crimes. You're going to get the phone book. There's going to be thousands, but whether it's 1, 2, 3 victims, again, there's only a handful of 3 or more victim abductions on record, but at 1 or 2, or even just what seem to be isolated incidents in other states. This suggests to me as someone who is, as part of their criminal career, made this a habit.
Now, at one point, there was a suspect, Eugene Garrison, who I brought up before in our cold case, because when you gave the tasks out, I thought I had to really jump in, completely head first. So what I did was I actually sent an email to him, because he had said that he had a friend who told him at a drunken party that he was involved in this. And then they ended up going to the farm to see that van that you were just talking about, and that they were buried on this farm, apparently. I did a little investigative work on the farm, which is something that people do not want to talk about really at all. And the person owning the farm has some ties to some drug, some drug things that are going on there that shouldn't be. But when I emailed him initially, he was almost ready to speak, thinking that I was a girl, just writing him a letter. And then when he realized that, I told him I'm a true crime teacher, I kind of want to essentially pick your brain, and then he was like, are you a cop? I don't want to talk to cops. And then he got all nervous or something. And he was, so at that point I kind of backed down and said, maybe I should approach this a different way. But he was one of there's so many. And I said this before, a lot of serial killers in Springfield, Missouri.
Yeah.
At the time anyway.
Yeah. And I mean, it's the sort of specter of the boogeyman around this case and nobody wanting to talk. I mean, again, a lot of people have put weight on the fact that this points to some conspiracy, organized crime. In reality, there's all kinds of examples that I can think of, but I mean, a good one would be David Lynch's series, Twin Peaks, whereby there's a murder in a smallish town, and what it does is the investigation peels back the veneer on everyone's lives and airs everybody's dirty laundry, not because they're involved, but they just come into the orbit of an investigation, and all of a sudden it turns out that this person's up to this and this person's up to that, because nobody's ever really questioned them, and everyone just wants this to go away because it's there's collateral damage, and ultimately people's privacy and trying to keep their name out of it becomes more important than actually solving the case, which is an unfortunate commonality in a lot of cold cases, which is that rather than closing ranks, everyone runs for cover and into a foxhole during the investigation.
And there's that element too that, with initially the anonymous tip line was getting so flooded with theories and psychics, and everyone knew an answer or knew a guy who knew a guy, that it created these theories that bubble to the surface. There's evidence of mob organized crime, people being buried under concrete. But if that just came, that theory got, validated through untraditional means, and now it's something that we're kind of running down. So there's a lot of sort of red herrings that are created just by the flood of information that came in initially.
Go on.
I was just saying, I think that with the, all of the tips coming in, of course they, did their duty and followed up on them. But a lot of the other ones kind of from in the moment got overlooked. Again, going back to the messages, in every single release I've seen, they've just been, a prank call or just brushed off as not important. But it would be almost impossible for it to be a coincidence for that exact house and it to happen 3 times, all while this is happening. So the real time evidence is what they're just tossing off to chance. And it's all I don't want to say wild goose chase, but that's the only word I can think of. Crazy, crazy parking garage theories are the ones that people are getting so tied up in and putting all of their time and energy into.
Well, and it's taken up a lot of our time just because that, again, is something that needs to be ruled out. Because if we can, then like I said, a whole new lane opens up. I'm actually surprised of all the bonkers theories that have been floated around this case, that Satanism is not one of them, that they weren't taken and sort of into a cult or sacrifice or something, because everything but that, and this is sort of at the later stage of the satanic scare of the 80s, and I'm quite surprised that hasn't been included, but and that's not to make light of it, but just that gives, I think, people a sense of just the wall-to-wall conjecture that has bogged this case down, and hopefully hasn't made it unsolvable, but has certainly made our work all that more difficult. Well, listen, thanks everyone for who was able to make it today and join us. I know it's the end of term, everyone's busy, but you've all done remarkable work and moved the needle on this to the point that I think there's enough through this podcast and through what I can share with law enforcement that something will be done one way or another, and that this case will not be consigned to the dustbin of history anymore. Okay, so everyone take care, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, guys. So, Michael, working with our Cold Case Society has proven to be extremely productive. I didn't even realize how important our work really was. And in seeing the students come together and even joining forces to figure out, the crime, I think we got even further than we thought we were going to get, honestly.
Yeah, and to put things in perspective, I mean, here's a 30-year-old case, and we're investigating this from hundreds of miles away. But this is, and look at what we were able to do in terms of connections, in terms of refuting theories, or if not refuting them, diminishing them in favor of relying on the science and other cases and the data. And I mean, this just goes to show the effectiveness of civilian investigation in cold cases. Not intrusive, and this goes back to the TED Talk I talked about at the start of the episode. Not intrusive, not meddling, but productive, factual, science-driven research, so we can call it research instead of sleuthing perhaps, that can allow, much like an effective offender profile. It's not pinpointing necessarily where the bodies are or who the killer is, but it allows investigators to make informed decisions and prioritize and marshal the resources based, again, on what the evidence says and what has been seen in other cases. Offenders and cases have common characteristics over the years. And when you look at what is called the homology principle for our viewers and listeners, basically means that, or this is the whole basis for offender profiling, criminal investigative analysis, which is that offenders who find a successful method of carrying out their crime, a successful MO, will stick to that MO because it's proven successful in the past. So we stick with what we know. At the same time, offenders who share a common MO, whether it's over the years or over different states, in the same year or over the same period, tend to have certain things in common. Offenders who travel outside of their familiarity area and comfort zone to offend, and who strangle and then transport the victim to a second crime scene, they're all going to have similar life histories and similar socioeconomic and demographic things in common because they've got access to a car, a private access to a car. They've chosen to strangle for some reason. They have confidence enough to travel the body on board in the middle of the night, and the risk of that is worth the reward of the body not being found or going to a second crime scene for some other ritualistic or sexual purpose.
Right.
If that is your life, you're going to have, again, things in common with other offenders who do that. And there's been studies on this done by the FBI as recently as 2016 that say, yeah, offenders who transport or versus those who dump versus those who leave bodies at the original crime scene have overwhelming biographical details in common. We're going to be going over some of those in coming weeks. So that's what we call homology, which is that, and these again are things that the resources in this case that we can share with law enforcement, drawing on those same studies, which I guarantee have not been applied to this case.
Well, I really hope that this case gets solved, and I hope it's not too far gone. So, just keep chipping away, and we'll just keep, doing what we have to do up against what we are up against.
Exactly.
Truthfully.
Exactly. And that's the purpose of the mission. This is, purpose-driven academic research for victims, which is why then now the next chapter in our work is the creation of this podcast, not to celebrate the crimes, but to remember the victims and to ideally close some of these cases. And in the cases we're examining that are solved and the offenders in custody, teach people what we can learn from these people so they can avoid being victims of another suspect zero.
Exactly. Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Dawn Washburn with my co-host, Dr. Michael Arntfield. See you next time on Suspect Zero.
In the next episode of Suspect Zero, the case of Mike DeBardeleben, aka the Mall Passer.